Hello, everyone. Around here, HOAs don't win, Karens get humbled, and sweet revenge is always on the menu. Hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss how this one ends. I just laid the last hamburger patty on the grill when I heard it, the distinctive whine of an electric motor straining up the slight incline of my driveway. The sound had become all too familiar in our neighborhood over the past month. A white golf cart with yellow emergency lights duct taped to the roof. The tangy scent of barbecue sauce filled my backyard as friends lounged in chairs scattered across my lawn. The early evening had cooled enough to be pleasant, at the sweet spot in Tampa when the brutal heat of the day finally surrendered. Ice clinked in glasses. Laughter punctuated conversations. My friend Dave was halfway through a story about his disastrous fishing trip when the doorbell rang. 3 short, aggressive bursts. "Hold that thought," I told Dave, setting my tongs on the side table. "I know exactly who that is." I'd moved into Cypress Creek Estates 5 years ago. The neighborhood attracted me with its tidy streets, convenient location, and reasonable price point. I knew about the Homeowners Association, of course, read through their regulations before signing the closing paperwork. 2.5-inch grass height requirements. Approved color palette for exterior paint. Reasonable stuff, mostly. I paid my dues on time, kept my yard maintained, and generally flew under the radar. That changed when Martha Coleman won the board presidency last year. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was relentless. New rules appeared monthly. Mandatory seasonal decorations. Stricter trash can placement guidelines. Limitations on when we could run sprinklers, even though the county already had restrictions in place. Then came the Community Safety Initiative. I walked through my living room, the cool air conditioning raising goosebumps on my arms after the heat of the grill. Through the frosted glass panels flanking my front door, I could make out a stocky silhouette, clipboard in hand. I took my time, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel before opening the door. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell." Dennis Wright stood on my welcome mat, chest puffed out beneath his white polo shirt with its unofficial-looking Community Safety Officer patch. A matching baseball cap sat squarely on his head. His perpetual frown had deepened into something that aspired to intimidation. "Evening, Dennis," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "What brings you by? We've received noise complaints about this property." His eyes flicked past me toward the sounds of my backyard gathering. He didn't specify who "we" referred to, but the royal plurality had become his standard phrasing. "Interesting. From whom?" Dennis ignored my question, making a show of writing something on his clipboard. "Additionally, there are vehicles improperly parked along the curb. That's a violation of Community Standards Section 4, Paragraph 8. I knew for a fact that Section 4, Paragraph 8 dealt with holiday decorations. The parking guidelines were in Section 6. More importantly, my friends' cars were parked legally on a public street, not even on HOA-controlled property. "Is that right?" I kept my tone neutral, even as I cataloged each inaccuracy. "I'll have to issue a citation." Dennis produced a yellow slip of paper from his clipboard that mimicked county code enforcement documents but lacked any official markings or authority. "This comes with a $100 fine, payable to the HOA within 10 days. I felt my neighbors watching from nearby windows. Most had learned to simply pay whatever arbitrary fines Dennis issued rather than face escalation. The HOA had been collecting these unauthorized penalties for months now, padding their accounts with what amounted to neighborhood extortion. In my professional life as a regulatory compliance specialist, I'd spent 15 years helping companies navigate complex governmental requirements. I recognized overreach when I saw it. Dennis had no legal authority to issue citations or collect fines, especially for activities on public property. His entire security operation existed in a gray area that very likely violated state laws regarding security services. I could have pointed this out. Could have refused the citation or told Dennis exactly where he could file his yellow slip. Instead, I took the paper from his hand. I appreciate your diligence, Dennis. Is there anything else? My calm reaction clearly disappointed him. He'd been hoping for an argument that would justify escalation. The noise needs to wrap up by 10 o'clock, and those cars need to be moved immediately. I'll certainly take that under advisement, I said, purposely vague. Dennis's jaw tightened. If the situation isn't remedied, I'll have no choice but to contact the sheriff's department. That was a bluff. The sheriff wouldn't respond to a noise complaint at 9:30 in the evening when the county ordinance allowed reasonable noise until 11 p.m. But the threat itself, that was interesting. That was evidence. Well, you do whatever you feel is necessary, I said. Have a good night. I closed the door before he could respond, waiting by the window until I heard the golf cart's motor whine as it pulled away. Through the blinds, I watched the yellow lights flash importantly as Dennis rolled down the street, no doubt looking for his next victim. Back in the yard, my friends looked up expectantly. "Everything okay?" Dave asked. "Just neighborhood security," I said, returning to the grill. The burgers had cooked perfectly during the interruption. I flipped them onto a waiting platter. "That guy's still playing cop? What a joke," Dave said, helping himself to a burger. "You ought to report him or something." "I'm thinking about it," I replied, taking a long pull from my beer. But reporting wasn't enough. Not for this situation. As conversation resumed around me, I turned the encounter over in my mind. Dennis's unauthorized patrol, the fake citation, the implied threat of calling law enforcement, the vehicle modifications that probably violated transportation regulations. All of it built on Martha Coleman's desire to control every aspect of our neighborhood. I'd seen this pattern before in my professional work. Organizations overextending their authority until someone pushed back with documentation and legal citations. I understood exactly what authorities would need to see to take action against this kind of overreach. What Dennis and Martha didn't realize was that they'd finally targeted someone who knew precisely how to dismantle their operation. Someone with the patience and expertise to do it thoroughly. As I rejoined my friends, passing around condiments and fresh drinks, a plan began forming in my mind. I wouldn't confront Dennis directly or file a single angry complaint that could be dismissed. No, this called for something more comprehensive. I'd give them enough rope to hang themselves, document every violation, build an airtight case. The hamburger tasted particularly good that evening as I mentally outlined the steps I'd need to take. Every professional instinct I'd developed over 15 years clicked into place as I considered state statutes and regulatory frameworks. By the time I served dessert, I had the beginnings of a strategy that would expose not just Dennis's patrols, but the entire structure of HOA overreach. My friends stayed late, their cars remaining parked exactly where they were. No sheriff arrived. The night air carried the fading scent of charcoal and the sounds of laughter well past Dennis's arbitrary curfew. I collected the yellow citation and placed it carefully in my home office, the first piece of evidence in what would soon become a substantial file. Martha Coleman and Dennis Wright had no idea what was coming. I stood at my office window the morning after the barbecue, coffee mug in hand, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the branches of my oak tree. The yellow citation from Dennis sat on my desk, cornerstone of what would soon become something much larger. I'd spent half the night researching Florida statutes after my guests left, the grill still warm on the patio. My finger traced the edge of the fake citation. The paper stock wasn't even the right weight, too flimsy compared to real government documents. County citations used watermarked paper with official seals. This was glorified printer paper with a clip art badge hastily added to the header. The Community Safety Initiative had started small. Dennis and 2 other men Martha had appointed began driving that golf cart around the neighborhood about 4 months ago. At first, they just watched and took notes. Then came the yellow vests, the matching polos with embroidered patches, the clipboard, the citations. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled HOA Documentation. Inside, I made subfolders for photos, recordings, citations, and legal research. Then I photographed Dennis's citation from both sides and filed the digital copy, placing the original in a physical folder. Before heading to work, I deliberately left my garage door open about 6 inches. The HOA regulations specified that garage doors must remain fully closed when not in active use. I set up a small security camera on my bookshelf, angled toward the driveway, and activated the motion detection and audio recording features. The workday dragged. During lunch, I checked my security app. No visitors yet. I sent a text to Dave. Operation Rope commenced. Will update. He replied almost immediately. Go get 'em. That evening, I pulled into my driveway at 5:43 p.m. The garage door remained exactly as I'd left it. I gathered my briefcase and walked to the front door, making no move to close the garage. Inside, I checked the security feed. Nothing all day. Interesting. Either Dennis was off duty, or he only responded to complaints rather than actively patrolling. Time to test another theory. The next morning, I placed my trash bins at the curb. Tuesday pickup wasn't until Thursday, a clear violation of Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines. This time, I didn't have to wait long. At 7:21 a.m., while eating breakfast, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Through the app, I watched Dennis's golf cart roll to a stop in front of my house. He wore the white polo and baseball cap, clipboard tucked importantly under his arm. He photographed my trash bins from multiple angles, scribbled something, and then produced one of his yellow citations. As he marched up my walkway, I activated the door camera's recording function. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, his signature move. I counted to 10 before opening the door, coffee mug still in hand. Morning, Dennis. Mr. Mitchell. His tone conveyed disappointment rather than surprise. I see your trash bins are out. Collection isn't until Thursday. Are they? Must have mixed up my days. I sipped my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. Dennis thrust the yellow citation toward me. This is a $25 fine. Trash bins should only be placed curbside after 6 p.m. the day before scheduled collection. I took the paper. Understood. Who do I make the check out to? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Usually, people argued or complained. The Cypress Creek HOA, of course. Is there a specific address? The HOA office is only open Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I wouldn't want this to be late. Dennis's eyebrows furrowed. You can place it in the drop box at the clubhouse or give it directly to me. And you're authorized to collect fees on behalf of the HOA? I kept my tone curious rather than confrontational. I'm the head of community safety, he said, chest puffing slightly. All citations go through me before being processed. Got it. Thanks for clarifying. I held up the citation. I'll take care of this right away. After he left, I downloaded the video file, trimmed it, and saved it in my evidence folder. Then I pulled my trash bins back to the side of the house. By lunchtime, I'd written a check to the HOA for $25 and carefully noted Citation Yurka 4752, Early Trash Placement, in the memo line. I took a photo of the check before sealing it in an envelope and dropping it in the clubhouse payment box. The paper trail had begun. Over the next few days, I committed a series of minor infractions, each carefully selected from the HOA guidelines. I left my hose uncoiled on the lawn. I installed a bird feeder without submitting the required landscaping modification form. I parked my car slightly over the edge of my driveway onto the grass. Each violation brought Dennis to my door with increasing satisfaction. Each encounter was recorded, each citation filed, each fine paid with meticulous documentation. I maintained a spreadsheet tracking dates, times, alleged violations, fine amounts, and relevant HOA guidelines. Between these calculated slip-ups, I researched Florida statutes governing homeowners associations and security services. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Chapter 493 of Florida statutes required licensing for anyone providing security services. Security officers needed background checks, training, and state-issued credentials. Using vehicles with emergency lights without proper authorization violated transportation regulations. Impersonating security personnel constituted a criminal offense. Dennis and his community safety officers had none of the required licensing or training. Their entire operation existed outside the law. A week into my project, I ran into Lisa Harmon at the neighborhood mailboxes. She lived 3 doors down from me and taught kindergarten at the elementary school. "How are you holding up with the citation squad?" she asked, sorting through her mail. "They got me last week for improper holiday decorations because my wind chimes had red and green beads. In May." She rolled her eyes. "They've been keeping busy," I said carefully. "You paid the fine?" $50. She shook her head. "Easier than fighting it. Mark Henderson tried arguing with Dennis last month and ended up with the sheriff at his door for disturbing the peace. The deputy didn't do anything, but it was humiliating having a patrol car in his driveway." I nodded, filing away this information. "Have other neighbors had similar experiences?" "Are you kidding? The Reynolds got cited for their kid's basketball hoop. The Patels for having dinner guests park on the street overnight. Mrs. Baker, she's 83, got fined because her flower beds had unapproved plant varieties." Lisa lowered her voice. "I heard they collected over $2,000 in fines last month alone." "That's quite a revenue stream," I remarked. "It's a racket is what it is." She glanced around before continuing. "Martha's son-in-law works for the landscape company that got the new maintenance contract. Tripled the annual fees, and now they're collecting all these fines too. Nobody wants to speak up at meetings because Dennis takes notes on who complains." I walked home with this new information, adding Lisa's account to my growing file. That evening, I created a secure online form and sent it to a few trusted neighbors, asking them to document their experiences with the HOA patrol. Within 24 hours, I had 8 detailed responses describing similar patterns of intimidation, arbitrary enforcement, and threats. 10 days into my documentation project, I deliberately triggered another encounter. I installed solar pathway lights along my front walkway, a clear violation of the exterior modification rules without prior approval. When Dennis arrived the next morning, I was ready. "Good morning," I said before he could speak. "Let me guess, the walkway lights?" "You failed to submit Form 13-B for exterior modifications," he said, already writing the citation. "That's a $75 fine, plus you'll need to remove the lights until approval is granted." "Just out of curiosity, what authority do you have to issue these fines?" I kept my tone conversational. Dennis straightened. "I'm authorized by the HOA board as head of community safety." "And that position gives you the authority to issue legally binding fines?" His eyes narrowed. "These are HOA violations. The citations are official." "But you're not actually a licensed security officer, are you?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. "I don't need to be. This is a private community matter." His voice had an edge now. "I see. And that golf cart with the yellow lights? That's registered as an emergency vehicle with the state." Dennis took a step back. "Look, if you have a problem with how we maintain community standards, you can take it up with the board. Otherwise, this fine is due within 10 days. "Or what happens?" I pressed. "Or additional penalties will be assessed, and we may need to involve the sheriff for non-compliance." He thrust the citation toward me. "Is that a threat to call law enforcement over a homeowner association matter?" Dennis's jaw tightened. "It's standard procedure for continued violations." I took the citation. "Thank you for explaining the process so clearly." That night, I compiled everything I'd gathered. 12 recorded interactions with Dennis, 17 photographs of him in his unauthorized uniform, 8 images of the modified golf cart with its yellow lights, copies of 15 bogus citations totaling $475 in fines, and audio recordings of Dennis claiming authority and threatening to involve law enforcement. I added the testimonials from neighbors, copies of relevant Florida statutes, and a timeline of the HOA's escalating enforcement tactics. The file was comprehensive, methodical, and damning. On the Sunday marking 2 weeks since my barbecue, I sat at my desk reviewing the complete documentation. Outside, Dennis's golf cart rolled slowly down the street, yellow lights flashing importantly as he searched for his next target. I watched him pause in front of the Wilsons' house, noting something on his clipboard. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation website. The complaint form waited on my screen, a simple portal that would set everything in motion. I attached my evidence files, each neatly labeled and categorized, then completed the required fields describing the unlicensed security operation in our neighborhood. My cursor hovered over the Submit button. 2 weeks of strategic patience had built an airtight case that would bring this entire operation crashing down. I thought about Lisa's $50 fine for wind chimes, Mrs. Baker at 83 being penalized for her flowers, and all the other neighbors who paid these illegitimate fines out of fear or convenience. I clicked Submit. The confirmation page appeared, assigning my complaint a case number and estimated review time. I printed the confirmation for my records, adding it to the growing physical file on my desk. Martha Coleman and Dennis Wright had given themselves enough rope. Now it was time to let the system they'd abused so thoroughly return the favor. The morning after submitting my complaint, I refreshed my email every 15 minutes, though I knew bureaucracy rarely moved that quickly. The Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation's automated response had estimated an initial review period of 2 to 5 business days, with a full investigation potentially taking several weeks. I sipped my coffee, bitter and slightly burnt from sitting too long on the warmer, and watched through my front window as Dennis's golf cart made its morning patrol down our street. He paused at the Morgans' house, scrutinizing their newly installed bird bath. The cart's electric motor whirred faintly in the morning stillness. I wondered if he had any inkling of what I'd set in motion. 3 days after my submission, the first real response arrived in my inbox. "Dear Mr. Mitchell," it began, "your complaint regarding unauthorized security services at Cypress Creek Estates, case CHRFL DBPR 234791, has been assigned to investigator Rebecca Sanchez. She will contact you shortly to discuss additional details." I printed the email and added it to my documentation folder, the paper still warm from the printer. Exactly 47 minutes later, my phone rang with a Tallahassee area code. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Sanchez from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation." I took the call in my home office, door closed though I was alone in the house. "Yes, good morning. I'm reviewing your complaint regarding unauthorized security operations in your community," she said. Her voice was precise and professional. "I must say, your documentation is impressively thorough." 15 years as a regulatory compliance specialist," I replied. "I understand what makes a compelling case." "It shows. I have a few clarifying questions, if you don't mind." For the next 38 minutes, I walked her through the evolution of our HOA's security program. I described how Dennis and his team had gradually escalated from simple observation to uniformed patrols, unauthorized citations, and fee collection, complete with implied threats of law enforcement involvement for non-compliance. "And you've confirmed none of these individuals hold Class D security licenses?" she asked. "I checked the DBPR licensee database myself. Neither Dennis Wright nor any of the other patrol members appear." "What about the HOA board's authorization of these activities?" "That's documented in their meeting minutes from February," I said, referencing my notes. Item 7C authorized a community safety initiative with an initial budget of $3,500 for equipment and supplies. Martha Coleman, the board president, specifically appointed Dennis Wright as head of the program. Ms. Sanchez made a sound that might have been professional appreciation. You've really done your homework, Mr. Mitchell. When rules are being abused, proper documentation is the most effective response. After a few more questions about the golf cart modifications and citation process, she paused. I should inform you that yours isn't the only complaint we've received about this HOA. My eyebrows rose. Oh? I can't share specific details, but 3 other residents have filed complaints in the past month. None as comprehensive as yours, but they corroborate the pattern. This was unexpected. I'd been meticulously building my case, unaware that others had already begun pushing back. A ripple of satisfaction spread through me. I wasn't alone in recognizing the overreach. That's good to know, I said carefully. We're consolidating these complaints into a single investigation, Mr. Sanchez continued. Your evidence will form the core, but the multiple reports demonstrate a concerning pattern. I'll be reaching out to the HOA board within the week to inform them of our investigation. After ending the call, I sat at my desk processing this new information. I'd assumed I was the only one taking action. The thought of other neighbors independently standing up against the HOA's tactics was both surprising and reassuring. The next morning, I spotted Dennis making his rounds earlier than usual. His golf cart moved with particular purpose, stopping at the clubhouse where Martha's silver Lexus was parked in the board president's reserved space. The two spoke briefly outside, Martha's arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pinched with concern. Dennis gestured emphatically, his clipboard tapping against his thigh in agitation. They'd received notice of the investigation. I kept my distance over the following days. When I passed Martha at the mailboxes, I offered a polite nod which she returned stiffly. The air between us felt charged, like the heaviness before a storm. If she suspected my involvement, she gave no obvious indication. Dennis continued his patrols, though with less frequency and without the yellow lights flashing atop his golf cart. 1 week into the investigation, I received another email from Ms. Sanchez requesting copies of all citations I'd received in the past 6 months. I sent the complete set with payment records, noting dates, times, and alleged violations. 8 days after my initial submission, I encountered Lisa Harmon while walking to the community pool. The concrete path radiated heat through the soles of my sandals. "Have you heard?" she asked, falling into step beside me. Her voice was pitched low despite the empty sidewalk. "The state is investigating our HOA's security patrol." I maintained a neutral expression. I had heard something about that. Apparently, they need actual licenses to issue citations and call themselves officers. Her eyes gleamed with vindication. They've been operating illegally this whole time. That would explain why Dennis stopped using those yellow lights, I observed. Martha's in a complete panic. Emergency board meeting last night. Lisa leaned closer, the scent of her sunscreen mixing with the chlorine smell wafting from the pool ahead. My neighbors on the architectural committee said Martha was talking about potential fines and legal liability. I nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Some people think it was the Hendersons who reported them, after that basketball hoop fiasco. Lisa gave me a questioning look. Could have been anyone, I said mildly. Seems like most of the neighborhood had run-ins with Dennis at some point. Lisa nodded vigorously. Mrs. Baker is practically celebrating. Says it's about time somebody stood up to them. As the second week of the investigation unfolded, subtle changes appeared throughout Cypress Creek Estates. The community safety golf cart remained parked behind the clubhouse, covered with a tarp that flapped in the breeze. Several board members were conspicuously friendlier during chance encounters. Citation activity ceased entirely. During this lull, I maintained my routine while quietly updating my documentation. I photographed the covered golf cart. I saved copies of a hastily issued community newsletter that announced a temporary pause in safety monitoring activities. The paper was thin and the printing crooked, suggesting a rushed job. 15 days after my complaint submission, Ms. Sanchez called again. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to update you on our investigation," she said. "After reviewing the evidence and interviewing board members, we've expanded our inquiry beyond the security operations." "Oh." I settled into my office chair, the leather creaking under my weight. "We've uncovered several concerning practices regarding fine collection and fund allocation," she continued. "The board has been unable to provide proper accounting for citation revenues, and there are questions about vendor relationships." I thought of what Lisa had mentioned about Martha's son-in-law and the landscape contract. That sounds thorough. "These investigations typically remain confidential until completed," Mr. Sanchez added, "but I wanted you to know we're taking this very seriously. The evidence you provided opened the door to a much broader review." "I appreciate the update." 3 weeks to the day after submitting my complaint, I returned home from work to find an official letter in my mailbox. The Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation seal adorned the top of the page. I took it inside, set my briefcase down, and read the contents at my kitchen counter. The paper had weight to it, the kind reserved for official correspondence. "Dear Mr. Mitchell," it began, "this letter serves as official notification that the department has completed its investigation into case CNFL DBPR 234791 regarding unauthorized security operations and related HOA practices at Cypress Creek Estates." I read on as the letter detailed the investigation's findings. Unlicensed security activities, unauthorized use of emergency lights on vehicles, improper collection of fines, and misrepresentation of authority. The department had determined that these activities constituted multiple violations of Florida statutes. "Enforcement action will be taken against the HOA board and individuals involved in these unauthorized operations," the letter continued. "A formal hearing has been scheduled for June 15th at the regional office. As the primary complainant, you may attend if you wish to provide additional testimony, though your presence is not required as your written documentation has been entered into evidence." The letter concluded with contact information for follow-up questions and a statement thanking me for bringing these violations to their attention. I placed the letter in my documentation folder and stood at my kitchen window. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Green lawns, tidy driveways, children's bikes left on front porches. A sprinkler hissed and ticked across someone's yard. The same view I'd appreciated when I first moved in, before Martha's regime began their systematic overreach. In the distance, I could see Martha's house, its exterior paint the exact shade specified in the approved color palette. No signs of the turmoil that must be unfolding inside as she faced the consequences of her actions. I hadn't needed to confront anyone directly, hadn't needed to engage in heated arguments or public accusations. I'd simply documented the facts, presented them to the proper authorities, and let the system work. The notification letter sat in my folder, its official seal proof that sometimes the most effective response to abuse of power wasn't outrage or resistance, it was methodical documentation and strategic patience. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days. I passed it each morning on my way to the coffee maker, the state seal catching the early light that filtered through the blinds. The investigation had concluded faster than I'd expected. Now came the formal hearing, June 15th, just 11 days away. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not even Lisa Harmon, who'd taken to stopping by my mailbox with updates on the neighborhood gossip. Better to let the process play out without my fingerprints visible on every stage. The morning of the hearing dawned hot and sticky, typical Tampa summer weather that made my dress shirt cling to my back before I even left the house. I chose a navy blue tie, professional but not showy, the kind you wear when you want to be taken seriously but not remembered specifically. The regional office occupied the 3rd floor of a bland government building downtown. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. Goosebumps replaced sweat as I checked in with a receptionist whose expression suggested she'd seen every variety of regulatory dispute imaginable. Mitchell, I said, for the Cypress Creek HOA hearing. She checked her computer. Room 307. They're just getting started. The hearing room was smaller than I'd pictured, more conference room than courtroom. A long table faced a row of chairs. 3 DBPR officials sat behind the table with Rebecca Sanchez in the center. Martha Coleman sat stiffly at one end of the front row, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. 2 men in suits flanked her. One, older, with a leather portfolio, likely the HOA's attorney, and another I recognized as the board treasurer. No sign of Dennis. I slipped into a seat in the back row. 5 other residents from Cypress Creek had shown up, including Mrs. Baker, who clutched her purse with white-knuckled hands. She nodded at me, the slight movement making her silver hair quiver. Rebecca Sanchez tapped her microphone. This hearing will now come to order. Case number FL-DBPR 23-47291, regarding unauthorized security operations and related violations at Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association. What followed was 2 hours of methodical dismantling. The investigators laid out their findings point by point, their voices matter-of-fact as they detailed each violation. Martha's face grew increasingly pinched as they presented evidence, much of it mine, though my name was never mentioned. The department has documented 17 instances of unlicensed individuals presenting themselves as security personnel, Sanchez stated, sliding photographs across the table. Dennis in his uniform, clipboard in hand, the golf cart with its yellow lights, citation slips bearing the unofficial HOA security logo. The HOA attorney tried twice to interrupt. My client had no knowledge that... Board meeting minutes from February 12th, Sanchez continued, holding up a document. Item 7C shows President Coleman specifically authorized Mr. Wright as head of the Community Safety Initiative and approved a budget for equipment including, quote, vehicle modifications and safety gear. Martha shifted in her chair. The leather squeaked in the quiet room. Furthermore, Sanchez continued, financial records indicate the HOA collected approximately $7,300 in unauthorized fines over a 4-month period. These funds were deposited into the general operating account without proper documentation or allocation. The HOA treasurer stared at his shoes. The department finds these actions constitute willful violations of Florida statutes, Chapter 493, regarding unlicensed security services, as well as multiple violations of Chapter 720 governing homeowners association operations. Martha finally spoke, her voice higher than normal. We were simply trying to maintain community standards. There was no intent to... Intent is not relevant to the violations, Ms. Coleman, Sanchez replied. The actions themselves are what concern the department. I watched from my back row seat, hands folded in my lap. The scene reminded me of dozens of compliance hearings I'd witnessed in my professional life. The same clinical dissection of violations, the same fumbling attempts at justification. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that the system was working exactly as it should. The hearing concluded with the announcement of penalties. Martha received a personal fine of $5,000 for authorizing unlicensed security operations. The HOA itself faced a $10,000 penalty for improper fine collection and record-keeping violations. Dennis and his 3 patrol members, though absent, were issued cease-and-desist orders with explicit warnings that continued violations would result in criminal charges. Additionally, Sanchez said, the HOA is ordered to refund all improperly collected fines with interest and to submit to quarterly financial reviews for a period of 2 years. Martha's attorney scribbled furiously on a legal pad. This hearing is adjourned. As we filed out, Mrs. Baker paused beside my chair. Were you the one? She whispered, her pale blue eyes searching mine. I shrugged. Just a concerned resident. She patted my arm, her thin fingers cool through my shirt sleeve. Well, someone finally stood up to them. About time. 3 days after the hearing, an official notice appeared on every door in Cypress Creek Estates. The paper was thick, creamy stock, not the flimsy sheets the HOA usually used for newsletters. The state seal at the top matched the one on my letter. Notice of Regulatory Action, the heading read. Below followed a concise summary of the findings and penalties against our HOA. The board was required to post this notice in all common areas and distribute it to all residents, part of the department's corrective action requirements. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In 5 years, I'd attended exactly 3. Once when I first moved in, once when they proposed a special assessment for clubhouse renovations, and once when they changed the pool hours. This time felt different. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the community room nearly full. The usual scattered attendance replaced by rows of folding chairs occupied by stone-faced residents. Martha sat at the board table, looking smaller than usual. 2 chairs beside her remained empty, her usual allies on the board notably absent. The community room's harsh overhead lights washed out her complexion, making the rouge on her cheeks stand out like fever spots. I took a seat in the back row, nodding to neighbors who caught my eye. A low murmur of conversation filled the room, punctuated by occasional spikes of laughter that held no humor. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Martha tapped her gavel. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls of the suddenly silent room. I call this meeting of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association to order, she said, her voice steady but thin. The minutes from the previous meeting were read and approved. The treasurer gave his report, careful to note that the financial statements did not yet reflect the penalties or required refunds, which would appear in next month's accounting. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Before we move to new business, Martha said, I am obligated to address the recent findings of the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation regarding our Community Safety Initiative. She unfolded a sheet of paper, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. For the next 8 minutes, she read the official findings aloud. Each violation, each penalty, each corrective action required. The words emerged in a monotone, as if she were distancing herself from their meaning. Volunteers who improperly presented themselves as security personnel, she read. The man beside me snorted quietly. Improper collection and allocation of fine revenue. Mrs. Baker shook her head, her silver earrings catching the light. Cut, cease and desist orders with warnings of criminal prosecution for continued violations. When Martha finished reading, she folded the paper and looked up. The room remained silent, 50 pairs of eyes fixed on her face. I want to assure all residents, she began, that there was never any intent to— Where's Dennis? Someone called from the middle row. Shouldn't he be here to explain himself? Martha's lips tightened. Mr. Wright is no longer affiliated with the HOA in any capacity. What about our money? Lisa Harmon asked, standing up. I paid over $200 in those fake citations. When do we get refunds? The treasurer leaned forward. We're preparing a schedule for reimbursements based on our records. All residents who paid these fees will receive full refunds with interest by the end of next month. What if we don't have receipts? Another voice called. Dennis sometimes just took cash. The questions continued for nearly an hour, pointed, angry, relentless. Martha attempted answers that sounded increasingly desperate. Her explanations about community standards and security concerns fell flat against the reality of the state's findings. I sat quietly, watching the board members squirm under the community's scrutiny. This wasn't my moment. I hadn't done this for recognition or to watch Martha's public humiliation. I'd done it because rules matter, both following them and enforcing them properly. As the meeting wound down, Martha announced the resignation of 2 board members, the vice president and secretary. We will be holding a special election to fill these positions at next month's meeting, she said, her voice hollow. Any resident in good standing may submit their name as a candidate. The aftermath unfolded gradually over the following weeks. The golf cart remained parked behind the clubhouse, its yellow lights removed, a layer of pollen settling on the tarp that covered it. Dennis sold his house and moved out with remarkable speed, the moving truck appearing just 10 days after the hearing. I watched from my kitchen window as the last boxes disappeared inside, wondering if he'd found another community to patrol. Martha held on to her position through the July meeting, then resigned in August. Her letter, read aloud by the interim president, cited personal reasons and a desire to focus on family matters. She didn't attend the meeting where it was announced. The refund checks arrived in mid-July, each with a form letter apologizing for administrative errors in our community standard enforcement procedures. Mine totaled $475 plus $12.83 in interest, the exact amount I'd documented in my spreadsheet. The most significant changes came in September, when the newly elected board unveiled revised operating procedures. All new rules would require legal review before implementation. Violations would be handled through a transparent, documented process with clear appeal rights. The Community Safety Initiative was officially disbanded, with those funds redirected to actual security improvements, better lighting in common areas, and upgraded locks for the pool and tennis courts. I found myself stopped more often at the mailboxes or while walking my neighborhood. Neighbors who had barely nodded before now paused to chat. "Much better around here these days," Mr. Rodriguez commented one evening as we both rolled our trash bins to the curb, on the proper day before collection. "No more yellow citation slips under the door." "It's nice to see things running properly," I agreed. "Word is, you had something to do with that." He studied my face. "Someone who knows how the system works." I shrugged. "The system usually works fine when you document the facts properly." He chuckled. "Well, whoever it was did us all a favor." I didn't confirm or deny. The results spoke for themselves, and that had always been my only goal. On a Saturday in early October, I hosted another backyard barbecue. Friends from the neighborhood filled my patio. Kids chased each other through the sprinkler I'd set up on the lawn, and cars lined the street without a single citation slip in sight. The smell of grilling burgers mingled with the scent of fresh-cut grass and chlorine from the nearby community pool. Lisa Harmon arrived with a bottle of wine. "Heard you're the neighborhood hero," she said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "The regulatory specialist who brought down the HOA police." I flipped a burger. "Just a guy who knows which forms to fill out." "Uh-huh." She smiled. "Well, thanks anyway." As the evening stretched on, I watched my neighbors relaxing in lawn chairs, laughing and sharing stories. Children played tag between the adults, unconcerned about noise violations or unapproved activities. The new board president waved from across the yard, a beer in his hand. What I'd learned through this whole process wasn't revolutionary, but it was worth remembering. Sometimes the most effective response to abuse of power isn't direct confrontation or public outrage. Sometimes it's just meticulously documenting every overreach and submitting the paperwork through proper channels. Let them provide enough rope, keep records of how they use it, and wait for the system to work. I never did frame the yellow citations or the state's findings letter. I simply filed them away in my home office, evidence of a chapter closed. Rules existed for a reason, not to control people, but to protect them. That was something Martha and Dennis had never understood.